If you love emotional stories, make sure to subscribe, because the next story might just change the way you see life. The park was quiet that evening, bathed in the soft glow of lampposts and the faint shimmer of stars above. Families had already drifted home, leaving behind the faint echo of laughter and the rustle of leaves dancing in the cool night breeze. On a worn wooden bench sat Daniel, a single father, with his daughter curled up beside him. She leaned against his shoulder, her eyelids heavy but unwilling to surrender to sleep just yet. Daniel's life had been a series of adjustments since he became a single parent. Days were long, filled with the weight of responsibility, work, school runs, cooking, cleaning, and the endless balancing act of keeping everything together. Nights, however, carried a different rhythm. They belonged to him and his daughter alone, a space where the world grew quieter, and love found its way through the simplest of moments. That night, instead of rushing home, he had brought along his old guitar. It had gathered dust for years, abandoned when life grew too heavy to allow for music. But his daughter had begged him to play, her small hands tugging at the case until he relented. And so, under the soft glow of the stars, Daniel strummed gently, letting the chords float into the night air. The melody was simple, but to his daughter, it was magic. She swayed slightly, her tired eyes lighting up with every note. Daniel watched her, a warmth spreading through his chest. For all the challenges, for all the moment of exhaustion, there were also moments like this, moments where love felt like music, soft and unbreakable. As he played, he thought of the past. Once, the guitar had been more than just wood and strings. It had been his companion during long nights of dreaming, his outlet during heartbreak, and his way of expressing what words could not. Now, it had returned, not as a tool for himself, but as a gift for his daughter. She didn't care about the missed notes or the cracks in his voice when he hummed along. All she cared about was that he was there, filling the night with something beautiful. The park, though nearly empty, wasn't entirely deserted. A few passers-by walked their dogs or strolled quietly, and some paused for a moment, drawn to the sound of music. Daniel didn't notice them. His focus was entirely on the little girl beside him, her smile brighter than the moonlight. Yet among the small audience was someone who lingered longer, someone who didn't just hear the music, but felt it, carried on the honesty of a father's love. Daniel finished the tune with a gentle strum, his daughter finally drifting into sleep against his shoulder. He sat there quietly, guitar resting across his lap, staring up at the night sky. In that stillness, he realized that while life had taken much from him, it had also left him with something irreplaceable. His daughter was his song, his reason, his every note. What he didn't know was that this night, this simple act of playing guitar in the park, was not the end of a quiet routine. It was the beginning of something unexpected, something that would soon weave its way into their lives like a new melody, one that would bring companionship, hope, and love under the stars. The following evening came with the same weight of routine. Daniel hurried through work, collected his daughter from school, and pieced together a simple dinner at home. Life as a single parent left little room for luxury, but he had learned to cherish what they did have: laughter across the kitchen table, stories shared at bedtime, and the comfort of each other's company. But his daughter had not forgotten the night before. She tugged at his sleeve after dinner, her eyes sparkling with determination. She wanted the guitar again. She wanted the park, the stars, and the music that made her feel as though the world belonged only to them. Daniel hesitated, exhausted from the day, but the sight of her eager smile softened his heart. And so they returned, the guitar case in one hand, his daughter's small fingers in the other. The park was quieter this time, the chill of the evening keeping most people indoors, but the lamplight still spread its golden glow across the benches and winding paths. Once again, Daniel strummed. The melody rose into the night, soft yet steady, blending with the rustling leaves overhead. His daughter leaned against him, humming along to the tune she was already beginning to recognize. Her voice was faint but pure, carried with it the kind of innocence that could turn even the simplest sound into something unforgettable. But they were not alone. Among the passers-by was the same figure from a night before, the woman who had lingered longer than most. She approached quietly, pausing a short distance away, as though unsure whether to intrude. Her steps slowed, her gaze fixed on the father and daughter illuminated by the soft glow of the lamplight. To her, it wasn't just music. It was love woven into every chord, devotion carried in each imperfect note. She watched as Daniel's daughter swayed gently, her small hand resting on her father's arm, her eyes heavy with sleep, but unwilling to close until the last chord was played. The sight stirred something within the woman, a mixture of admiration and longing, as though she had stumbled upon a moment too fragile to belong to the world beyond that bench. Daniel noticed her only when he lifted his head, the final note fading into silence. Their eyes met briefly, a flicker of recognition passing between them. She offered a soft smile, one that seemed to say she understood, that she wasn't there to judge or to intrude, but to appreciate. For reasons he couldn't explain, Daniel didn't feel uncomfortable. Instead, he felt seen in a way he hadn't in years. So much of his life had been lived quietly, unseen, the sacrifices of single fatherhood unnoticed by the world around him. But in that brief exchange, it was as if someone had acknowledged not just the music, but the heart behind it. The woman lingered a moment longer before continuing down the path, disappearing into the shadows of the park. Daniel returned his gaze to the stars, the guitar still resting across his lap, his daughter asleep against his shoulder. He told himself it was nothing, just a passerby, someone moved by music for a fleeting second. Yet the memory of her smile stayed with him, echoing like a gentle refrain long after the strings of his guitar had grown quiet. What Daniel didn't yet know was that the stranger would return. And with each return, their lives would slowly begin to intertwine, note by note, until a new song began to form beneath the stars. The following days unfolded in their usual rhythm. School runs, work deadlines, laundry piles, and hurried dinners. For Daniel, life never slowed, and yet, in quiet moments, his mind wandered back to park. He thought of the music, of his daughter's sleepy humming, and of the smile of a stranger who had paused long enough to listen. It had been years since anyone outside his small world of two had noticed him, and the memory lingered like a faint melody that refused to fade. When the weekend arrived, his daughter asked once again to visit the park with the guitar. This time, there was no hesitation. Daniel felt a pull toward that familiar bench, not only for her, but for himself as well. There was comfort there, a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. That evening, the park was livelier. Children chased each other through the grass. Couples strolled hand in hand, and families picnicked beneath the stars. Daniel and his daughter claimed their spot beneath the lamplight, the wooden bench that had become their little stage. As he strummed, the familiar chords filled the air, weaving a soft thread of calm through the night's activity. It wasn't long before he noticed her again, the woman from before, her steps unhurried, carrying with her the same quiet presence. This time, she didn't linger at a distance. Instead, she found a spot nearby, sitting on a low stone wall with her gaze fixed not just on the music, but on the bond between father and daughter. Daniel tried to focus on the guitar, on the weight of his daughter leaning against him, but he couldn't ignore the awareness of her presence, the way it shifted the air around him. He played longer that night, not out of obligation, but because the music seemed to carry further, as though meant to reach someone beyond the girl at his side. When the song ended, his daughter clapped softly before laying her head back on his shoulder. He adjusted the guitar on his lap and let the silence settle. From the corner of his eye, he caught the woman's expression, a look of quiet admiration, but also of understanding. She wasn't simply enjoying a performance. She was witnessing something more intimate, the story of a father's love expressed through strings and song. For a fleeting moment, Daniel wondered about her life. Did she live nearby? Did she often wander the park in the evenings? What was she searching for in those quiet strolls under the stars? He didn't know, but a part of him wanted to. The woman eventually rose to leave, but before she did, she glanced his way once more, her eyes meeting his in a silent exchange that lingered longer than before. It wasn't bold or intrusive, just a spark of recognition, as if both of them understood that this was no longer chance. Something was forming, delicate and unspoken, like the opening notes of a song yet to be written. As the night deepened and his daughter finally drifted to sleep against his arm, Daniel sat quietly, the guitar resting across his knees. For the first time in years, he felt something stirring inside him, an awakening, a reminder that life could still hold surprises, even under the simplest of stars. By the next week, the evening visits to the park had become a quiet ritual for Daniel and his daughter. It was their sanctuary, a place where responsibilities melted away and love could be expressed in simple notes and gentle silence. Each visit carried the same routine, his daughter requesting her favorite melodies, Daniel strumming until her eyes grew heavy, and the stars looking down like witnesses to their small, unshakable bond. But this time was different. When they arrived at the park on a clear, cool evening, Daniel noticed her almost immediately. The woman was already there, seated on a low stone wall near their bench, her posture calm yet expectant, as if she had been waiting. Daniel settled into the bench, the guitar resting across his lap, and began to play. The chords rose into the night air, weaving to the rustle of leaves and the faint sounds of laughter from families still lingering in the park. His daughter hummed softly beside him, her head swaying gently to the rhythm. And then something unexpected happened. The woman began to sing. Her voice was soft at first, barely louder than a whisper, blending seamlessly with the sound of the guitar. It was tentative, as though testing whether her presence would be welcomed. But as the melody carried, her confidence grew, and soon her voice floated into the night with a richness that turned heads from nearby. Daniel felt the shift immediately. His fingers pressed the strings more deliberately, matching her tone, creating a harmony that felt both natural and new. It had been years since he had shared music with anyone, and the sensation was overwhelming. Together, their sounds filled the space with something deeper than entertainment. It was connection, pure and unspoken, stitched into every note. His daughter's eyes lit up. She sat straighter, looking back and forth between her father and the woman, delight shining on her face. For her, this wasn't just music. It was a moment of magic, where her father's quiet world of responsibility intersected with someone else's song. As the final note lingered, the park fell silent for a brief moment before soft applause broke out from those who had stopped to listen. Daniel felt his chest tighten with something he couldn't quite name, a mixture of pride, gratitude, and the faint stirrings of hope. He turned toward the woman, their eyes meeting once again, this time not in passing but in acknowledgement of something shared. The moment could have ended there, a fleeting collaboration between strangers. But instead of walking away, the woman stayed. She moved closer, taking a seat on the edge of the bench, her presence gentle and unassuming. His daughter, brimming with excitement, shifted slightly to make room, as though instinctively understanding that this was where she belonged. For the rest of the evening, they remained together. Not many words were exchanged, but they weren't needed. The music, the smiles, and the quiet laughter carried enough meaning on their own. As the stars deepened above them, Daniel realized that something had shifted permanently. What started as a solitary ritual between father and daughter had expanded into something new, something that carried the possibility of healing old wounds and opening doors he had long since closed. The weeks that followed seemed to slip by quietly, yet each one carried moments that wove deeper connections between Daniel, his daughter, and the woman they had met under the stars. What had once been a lonely ritual became a trio of laughter, music, and shared presence. The park no longer echoed with just the sound of a single guitar. It became a stage where voices and hearts blended, creating a rhythm of togetherness that felt destined. Daniel found himself watching her more often, not just as a companion, but as someone who seemed to understand the unspoken weight he carried. She never pushed, never asked more than he could give, but her presence alone softened the edges of his grief. His daughter, quick to notice, began to glow in ways Daniel hadn't seen before. She skipped with more confidence, smiled more easily, and seemed to look at a woman with a kind of admiration only children can express without words. It was during one particular evening, under a sky awash with stars, that the depth of their bond revealed itself. Daniel had been strumming absent-mindedly when his daughter tugged at his sleeve and whispered requests, not for a song he knew, but for the woman to sing again. When she lifted her voice, Daniel's daughter nestled between them, resting her small hand in both of theirs. In that simple gesture, a truth became undeniable. What had begun as music in the night had blossomed into something stronger, something whole. The park seemed to notice too. Parents and children who had once passed by with little more than a glance began to linger, drawn in by the warmth that radiated from their bench. Some even brought their own instruments, adding flutes, drums, or soft claps to mix. What started as a personal ritual had grown into a community gathering, centered not around performance, but around love for music, for family, and for the possibility of connection. For Daniel, this change carried both joy and fear. He had once believed his life would remain in quiet solitude, defined by loss and duty. Yet here he was, standing at the edge of something new, something that asked him to risk his heart again. The thought was daunting, but each time he looked at his daughter, her radiant smile reminded him that love wasn't only his to carry. It was hers to witness, hers to learn from, and hers to celebrate. One night, as they finished a song and the applause of gathered strangers faded into the night air, Daniel realized that what he had feared most, moving forward, had already happened. Without dramatic declarations, without promises carved into stone, love had returned his life in its gentlest form. It had arrived on the wings of music, carried by the stars, and welcomed by the small hand of a child who believed in magic. From that evening onward, the park wasn't just a place of healing. It became a place of beginnings. A father who thought his story had ended discovered that it was only just starting. A child who missed her mother found joy in the harmony of two voices. And a woman, drawn by the sound of guitar, became a melody that filled a home with hope again. Under the stars, love had been reborn, quiet, simple, and unforgettable. If you enjoyed the story, rate it out of 10 in the comments and don't forget to like the video.